Hi, in this video I'm going to show you how to use the Jointec jig to accurately batch out small parts. And one method will be for if you just have a very limited number of parts, and the other method will be for if you have a larger number of parts. So this first method would probably be a little bit more practical if you only had a small number of parts to batch out. And for this example, I'm going to be cutting out some small parts from this piece of sapele. For this method, I have the dial caliper installed on the jig and the jaw lock engaged, that I'm able to track how far the stock carriage moves. And I'll also be using the indexing guide, but first we're going to set up a 0 point, and I'll show you how to do that next. To find that 0 point, I'm going to take a scrap of wood, move the fence over into where I'm taking off just a little bit of this edge, and that'll tell me where the 0 point on this side of the blade is. Now before I move the fence, I'm going to bring a stock clamping guide over here, secure it to the stock carriage to where it is just kissing the 0 point of the scrap of wood. Now move the stock carriage over till I'm just touching that 0 point. It's right there. I'll move the fence and the scrap of wood out of the way. Now we're going to install the indexing guide, but we're going to install it upside down, which will allow us to get as close to the blade as we want, and this tab will be on the table saw top. And for this example, I'm just going to imagine that I want to cut 2 pieces at 1/2 inch, 2 at 3/4 of an inch, and 2 at 1 inch. So I'm going to start off by setting my indexing guide to the smallest piece. So what I'll do is move the stock carriage over by exactly 1/2 inch, and then set the indexing guide to that. So since we're at our 0 point, I'll go ahead and zero the caliper out. And then I'll move the stock carriage over by 1/2 inch. Now I'll pull the jig back away from the saw. Make sure I leave enough room for my wood to get between the jig and the saw blade. Then I'll use a little square to reference the indexing guide. And I'll just kiss it right to that stock clamping guide. Alright, so I'm going to get this stock clamping guide out of the way. I'm first going to just square up a piece of sapele by running it past where it's jagged here and get a good square cut to start. Now I can reference the wood to the indexing guide right here and go ahead and cut both of my 1/2 inch pieces. Now for my 3/4 and 1 inch pieces, all I need to do is reference my indexing guide again, and then reference this end of my stock with a stock clamping guide. Move the stock forward past the indexing guide, and then just read out another 1/4 inch on the dial caliper. Okay, so now I'll move that piece over by another 1/4 inch. Okay, I'll get these out of the way. Now I can cut my 3/4 inch pieces. Now I'll just run through that same process to cut the 1 inch pieces. I'll reference the indexing guide, then reference the stock clamping guide to this end of the stock, push it forward, use the dial caliper to read out another 1/2 inch of distance this direction, and run through that 2 more times, and that'll give me my 2 1 inch pieces. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and pull the calipers off, and I'll check those pieces to see how close they are to the measurements I wanted. Okay, so the 2 1/2-inch pieces, zero the calipers out first here. Right at a 1/2 on that one. Right at a 1/2. Now for the 3/4 pieces. Right at 3/4, maybe a thou or two shy. Right at 3/4, maybe a thou shy. And for our 1-inch pieces, that's right on an inch. And the other 1-inch piece, exactly an inch. Again, this method is handy for a small batch of small parts because you only have to set the index and guide up as a stop block once. And at that point, you can just use the dial caliper to cut your larger parts. And the next method I'll show you is handy if you have a larger batch of small parts to cut out and if your stock is too long to reference with the stock clamping guide. So what I'll do for this method is just simply reference the indexing guide to a known distance, make all of those cuts, and then just recalibrate the indexing guide to a new measurement and make all of those cuts. And in this example, I'll cut 10 at 1.5 inches and 10 at 2 inches. I'll start out the exact same way by finding the 0 point on this side of the blade with a scrap of wood. Okay, I'll get the calipers reinstalled. I'll get the fence, scrap of wood out of the way, zero the caliper out. Now I'll move the stock carriage over by 1.5 inches for my first round of cuts. So there's 1 inch, 1.5 inches. Reinstall the indexing guide for my stop block. And I'll square the end of the stock up, make our first cuts at this reference point. And now we'll put our stock clamping guide on, reference the stop block again, and then move everything over by another 1/2 inch for our 2-inch pieces. All right, I'll take the calipers off and spot check a few of these. Zero these out. All right, so for the 1.5 inch blocks, right on 1.5 inches. Another one. And right on 1.5 inches. And spot check a couple 2 inchers. Right on 2 inches. And right on 2 inches.